topics will be discussed during these days. In this workshop, as you could see the title, we mainly focus on the policy challenges for AI, such as issues on data protection, ethical considerations in AI's design core value, etc. To facilitate the diverse discussion, we are happy to have multi-stakeholder representatives here to share their insights on what policy changes AI will be encountered and how to create an enabling policy environment that conducive to the sustainable development from different dimensions and aspects. Please let me introduce the speakers on the panel. First, Mr. Satish Babu. I'm sorry, maybe he's for some reason, he's late. He's on the, oh, sorry, Claudio, yeah. sorry. Mr. Satish Babu, Chair of ICANN Apirello, Founding Director of the International Center for Free and Open Source Software. Welcome. And second, Ms. Akali Noguchi from Japan, and she worked for public policy and corporate governance in Yahoo Japan. And Mr. Claudio is still on the way, and then Mr. Ima, Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, UC Berkeley, Fellow of IEEE and ACM. Now, I will stop here and leave more time to them. And first, let's hear Akali's sharing. Akali has been worked for public policy and corporate governance at Yahoo Japan Corporation. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Ron. Okay. Bonjour, Madame et Monsieur. Je m'appelle Akari du Yahoo Japan Corporation. Let me speak in English moving forward. It's the only French I know. Okay, so it's such an honor to speak at IGF Geneva 2017 and see you all here. Thank you so much for coming. Today, I would like to introduce what kind of AI we are using and we will be using for our service and what's the challenges for AI development from the Japanese private sector's point of view. Okay, go next, please. Next slide, please. So before going to the main part, let me quickly introduce our company. We, Yahoo Japan Corporation, is a separate company from Yahoo Inc. that most of you here probably knows. That was recently purchased by Verizon Inc. Actually, the Yahoo Corporation is a joint venture of Yahoo Inc. and the Japanese company called SoftBank. So we have our own policy, independent policy, platform, and management. So in Japan, Yahoo is quite strong, and its page view is still #1 with the 65 billions, like a monthly. So actually, that's bigger than Google. It's kind of like a unique market. So in other markets, unfortunately, the situation is not same. But still, in Japan, Yahoo has a massive impact to the internet field and the internet users. So we believe it's our responsibility to lead the market, both in terms of the policy making, also the service development. Of course, that is for AI too. So next, please. So let's move on to today's theme, AI. By the way, what is AI? Is it like, it is a buzzword across the world, but its definition is quite depends on the context or speakers. And is it a supercomputer that processes like millions of data in 1 second? Or is it some kind of human-like robots that we see in the scientific fiction movie that eventually start fighting against the human beings? There are various definitions of AI, from so-called weak AI that mainly focus on specific applications to so-called strong AI or general AI that performs like humans. We do not have the general AI that learns, speaks, thinks just like humans yet. However, we already have some particular AI application, such as like listed here. Next, please. So let me introduce easy examples of like machine learning we currently use in Yahoo service. One easy example is like shopping recommendation that recommends the users with the related products or remind the purchase by analyzing the user data. Also, our Yahoo top page on mobile devices are personalized for each users with the most relevant news or content to appeal to them by analyzing their user data. Likewise, by compiling the browsing history and modeling, we show the most relevant advertisement to users. We also use the machine learning for the email filtering for the spam emails. Next, please. So we also use the machine learning for the security purpose. We hold lots of Yahoo accounts with users' important information connected, such as private email history or like their banking account for the e-commerce purchase. So it's very important for us to monitor and prevent the fake logins. As of now, our expert patrol team import the fake login patterns to the system to restart any suspicious access, and they check the list. But moving forward, we plan to automate it by using the AI to create the suspicious patterns list itself to find and prevent the new method of attacks, that never happened before. In the beta test, the accuracy was 100%, and it did increase the amount of accounts we can check and enabled to process the patrol more efficiently with less amount of time. Yeah, it's like the current way is like on the red circle here, and we use the AI to restart more suspicious logins that will be like pink among like all the fake logins. Next, please. Another example of AI patrol is for our auction service. We have the biggest web auction service in Japan with monthly like 25.8 million users, and there are always more than 52 million items on sale. Since the scale is quite big, sadly there exists lots of fraud. So typical fraud pattern is like selling the fake brands like Louis Vuitton or like Chanel, or like just not sending the items after the transaction, the deal is done, and just receive the money from the users. We, of course, have the guideline to prohibit those like fake fraud transactions and have the patrol for 24/7. Next, please. We've been using the machine learning to restart all the suspicious accounts or transactions based on the fraud patterns we found in the past. But these days, violators are really IT advanced to do attacks by programming, and like they create new patterns of fraud so quickly. So in order to maintain our auction market as quick and safe place, our service, we service providers are also required to keep on evolving. And like, we are sure AI will do a lot for that. Our future patrol will be enriched by AI by running the past and predicting the possible future patterns. Okay, next slide, please. So lastly, I would like to talk about the challenges we probably face for the AI development. As AI can be related to so many fields, the challenge can be also diverse, from like psychological effects to humans to how to foster the AI talent. But here today, I would like to point out three things: responsibility, accountability, and maturity. Responsibility is the question that who will be responsible for the AI decision? AI doesn't only follow the program ordered by humans, but it keeps on changing, so like it can result in the unexpected way. So, but if something that was not initially intended happens, is it AI itself or service provider or algorithm programmer that is responsible for the result? And if so, how to take the responsibility? Also, the accountability is so important for the transparency. If it's human that do some action, the person can explain the reason why for that action. But for AI, we cannot know the whole reason of that. And even if there is a lack of some important elements or mistakes, like it is difficult for us to know all about it. Given these two, I think we should be very careful for which field we use and how to use AI, especially for the businesses or social system that has the direct impact to people's lives, such as like recruiting or insurance estimation or credit accounts. Like, we better have human point of view judgment too, and not use AI alone. We must not let AI to systematically exclude a person from the society. Remember that AI is sort of labyrinth, and it may be right for analytic point of view, but most importantly, human faith and understanding should be respected. And lastly, the maturity of the AI market. As I mentioned in the beginning, we don't have the general AI that thinks or acts just like human beings yet. But at this stage, we have some AI kind of applications on the developing stage which process some area of work more efficiently than human. So the AI is not mature, and luring it too early, especially sort of like a hard law type regulation, may decelerate its development that will contribute to our society in a good way. So at this moment, the government, private sectors, and societies should keep eyes on its growth, consequently discussing the possible affairs. And if we are ready to set some rules in the future, we should respect the important values such as privacy, as well as the international harmonization, and not really stick to one country or divided country rules, because the upcoming internet digital world will be even more global, and the AI will be very smart, smarter, by utilizing wide variety of the data across the world. And most importantly, we have to earn the social trust to utilize the AI to the most. But is it enough just to follow the regulation to earn the social trust? No, that's not enough. Just following, just say hey, we don't violate any regulation, so we are okay. It's not that way. Yeah, we can earn the social trust not only by just following or respecting the regulation, but also by the morality. Especially for AI, the morality is the big issue that everyone concerns. So we better start discussing what is the important moral factors we should really respect for AI development while awaiting for the AI technology to bloom. Yeah, AI era has just started, so yet to come. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Akali, for your sharing. And next speaker is Mr. Professor. Oh no. Next speaker is Mr. Satish. He is chairman of ICANN Apparello. He's also the president in Computer Society of India. It's your floor, please.
Thank you very much, Ran. My name is Satish Babu, and I represent the civil society, and I'm part of ICANN, ISOC, and IEEE. And I'll, of course, be looking at the issue of AI policy from the end-user perspective, but also with specific relevance to something that Akari just mentioned. She said morality. I use the word ethics of the whole artificial intelligence. People have called artificial intelligence as the final invention of humankind, meaning, everything else will come from this invention itself. Akari also briefly mentioned the difference between the artificial general intelligence, AGI, and artificial intelligence. AGI is a sapient, sentient entity. Now, what these things mean, basically, sentience is the capacity to feel things or experience things. Sapience is the whole intellectual capacity. And when we have, in the future, maybe in the near-term future, entities that can both feel and also intelligently act, then you have the artificial general intelligence. We are not quite there yet. And the issue of non-human agents, which do tasks for us, is actually coming up already. There are many instances of these kind of agents. There are also things of coupling our human brain with the network, leading to things like, can we download a brain into the internet? Can we therefore have on the internet, on the cloud, these entities interacting among themselves? And what will be the ethical implications of these things? If you look a little bit into the future, we see that there are several dilemmas that these developments are going to pose in the future. Some of it is, the act of what happens when AI automates things. What happens primarily from the human perspective is that human beings lose jobs, unemployment. Now, as a policy, we have to consider what happens to the workforce when we start bringing in technology that takes away some of these jobs. What about the wealth created by machines? Machines are going to create wealth in future. How is that wealth going to be distributed amongst us? What is the equitable model of distribution of such wealth? How will our behavior change when we start interacting with the machines? Some of us are already addicts to the internet. When we have machines, and already we are talking about automation in every place, including the brothel, where we're going to have virtual entities and not just real human beings. So how is that going to change our behavior? When you have artificial intelligence, you also have artificial stupidity. Which is, do we tend to make mistakes when we interact with these machines? How about racist robots? Now, there have been many cases when, for example, there was a case where a bank was using an artificial intelligence algorithm to rate loan applications. And after a while, it is found that the rate of approval, or rather the rate of rejection, was much higher for blacks. Now, it is not built into the system like that, but it turns out whatever parameters you use are actually causing this bias. So will we have this issue of bias coming up? One doesn't assume that it is injected into the AI, but it spontaneously happens. How do we deal with this bias? Security. How do we keep our artificial intelligence safe from whatever enemies? How do we protect against unintended consequences? What happens if something totally unexpected happens as a result of these machines? How do we remain in control of what we create? There has been a book called Homo Deus, that means the human god, or humans have which has become God, in the sense of creating these sapient, sentient beings, the question that comes up is, will we really be able to challenge or stay in control of these things when they become really autonomous? And finally, do robots have rights, like human rights? So are there robotic rights? Do we have a moral obligation to these machines that we treat them in some, well, it's difficult to say humane, but I don't see any other word for robots that corresponds to humane. So do we have that obligation? There are also other challenges that come up. When you have a system that can parse spoken language, that system can then listen to all conversations. So what happens to our privacy? We can't expect machines to have empathy or a sense of the context. So what happens to human dignity? Now, jobs that require, suppose you talk about nurses or psychiatrists or people tending to old people. Now, these require compassion and context. Now, machines will not have that. So what happens to human dignity in the process? The issue of transparency. Now, these algorithms are not something that we can look at tangibly. If you take, for example, of an artificial neural network, there are no rule-based algorithms. It's adaptive, it learns, and you cannot separate it out for review, audit, etc. How do we ensure transparency? These algorithms are in proprietary companies. They are not open source. So how does humanity have control over these? And finally, the issue of weaponization. We are talking about lethal autonomous weapons, or LAWs, which has been an active domain of debate in the last few months. At least one nation state has said that they will continue to develop it, although UN has called for a ban against these things. So in summary, I'd like to flag some of these issues, and maybe in the discussions we can think of how we can address these ethical challenges that AI may pose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we will introduce Professor Claudio S. de Lucena. Long name.
It's a problem with generally with Brazilians, miss.
He is he's a professor of law, Center for Legal Studies, Paraíba. Yeah, okay. Paraíba State University of Brazil. Let's hear his view. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning, all of you. My idea, first, I want to thank the organization for bringing me here. I am developing research on law enforcement measures, automated law enforcement measures in a consortium between Paraíba State University. I don't know if you're going to be able to present the slides I brought from Paraíba State University in Brazil and the Foundation for Science and Technology in Portugal. The focus of the research is the automation of law enforcement that embed automation measures that embed law enforcement properties. That's the focus of the research. So I would be here joining you anyway because the state of being organized a panel by Chinese institutions and knowing that the stage of deployment and implementation of AI tools in China is such, I would be here following you anyway. So I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to join. And I would like to draw a very brief outline. I've heard the problems that were raised here, and I would like to bring to you a very brief overline of the policy initiatives, what's going on in the world. The idea is to give you a very quick glance of who is taking care of these policy initiatives, how are they doing, what are they deploying, and what are the remaining challenges. I don't think we have the it's a flash, Prezi. Is there a problem? I've sent to the email. Can you access from there? Ah, all right. Well, I think I'll just continue from here, and I'll then make the presentation available for you. Who is responsible for these policy initiatives? There are a number of institutions that are currently deploying them. We have professional organizations as the IEEE, who is developing a very interesting initiative concerning policy development. We have joint initiatives as the one we had in November in Brazil, Artificial Intelligence and Inclusion, which was an initiative of research centers across a network of centers, of internet and society centers across the world. Particularly this one organized by a consortium between the ITS Brazil and the Berkman Klein Center. We have NGOs which are also taking care of the issue, and we have a couple of governments who are also starting to deploy policy initiatives. How are they doing this? Well, the IEEE is developing a document which is taking inputs and developing into phases with guidelines and recommendations and deep analysis. The symposia and the academic institutions are usually gathering for how it worked in Brazil was that researchers gathered from 80 countries for 3 days in Rio, trying to first identify the research questions, what was controversial in the area, then how it could be scaled across the world, and what the challenges would be for the future. For the other institutions like the NGOs, we have the example of Article 19, who is proposing a new convention, which they, for the time being, call the Internet of Rights, with a couple of recommendations, including ones concerning automation also. And from governments, we have initiatives like the UK Parliament. There is a committee on artificial intelligence with the House of Lords. For one of the last acts of the Obama administration was also the release of a report concerning economic developments of artificial intelligence. The European Union, in the beginning of this year, in 2017, through a report that was conducted by MEP Marie Delvaux from Luxembourg, also presented a report on robotics and civil law on rules on robots. And there are other initiatives, like, for example, what happens in the United Arab Emirates. We have just been in ICANN for the Abu Dhabi meeting, a very long and controversial to some aspect meetings, and the United Arab Emirates had just announced that they are appointing a minister of state for artificial intelligence. So what are these measures in general? They are essentially, they are guidelines and principles. If we take a look, for example, at what's happening in the development of the document of IEEE, that seems to be, well, there are people in the room who are working specifically with that document, but it seems that as the GDPR has moved through to a privacy by design for the privacy issue, IEEE is moving to a safety by design concerning human needs in their document. And they are also preparing and presenting and opening discussion for guidelines and principles. Another issue, another measure that is being concretely taken is the proposal of agencies or regulators. One article a couple of years ago from Andrew Tutt, who used to be a lawyer for the Obama administration, proposed an FDA for algorithms. That's the title of the article, which was supposed to be an agency, a government agency, in charge of analyzing algorithmic accountability, transparency, the problems that were posed by Professor Satish. In the case of the United Arab Emirates, it seems that they're moving more to a specific, strictly, directly to a regulator and last to an agency. And of course, there are also new legal institutes. Once again, referring to the problem posed by Professor Satish, the EU report on civil law, on robotics, proposes a very, for the time being, a still very controversial article, 56F, if I'm not mistaken, which proposes a different legal status for robots, in broader English comprehensible terms, a legal personality for robots. The report of the European Union also advances into agencies and regulators when it proposes, and this is an interesting differentiation. It does not propose a general agency to tackle all the problems involving AI, but it says there are uses of AI that are particularly delicate, particularly sensitive, and for these ones, there should be regulations through an agency. So these are pretty much the initiatives what we have. What are the challenges we face right now? In the presentation I'm going to make available to all of you, there's a blog by Professor Urs Gasser from the Berkman Klein Center, who was with us yesterday for the Artificial Intelligence and Inclusion workshop as an update of the symposium. In the middle of the year, he has a blog post where he lays down very reasonable guidelines to tackle what are the challenges, what do we face ahead when we talk about policy development for AI. There are a couple of them. I'm going to present 2 or 3, and then I'm going to add my 2 cents to the discussion. He says, for example, that he urges us to look at AI as a set of techniques across different applications and not as a single monolithic technology. It sounds like a very reasonable thing. There are very different, very diverse applications that may embed and include AI, and we shouldn't look at it as a one thing only. He also says that law is important, but it's necessary that regulators look at other governance tools. Maybe law is not the only, or at least hard law is not the only option that we have here. He says that given, also one of his recommendations is that given the disruption power of what we're talking about, it might be necessary to just recode some aspects of the rule of law, and this calls for a very strong creativity from the part of regulators and lawyers. And the last one I'm going to highlight from his is that he points out that responses might vary across sectors and across jurisdictions, and we have to be ready to leverage and to balance these differences. I'm going to add 2 of the things that we have been coming across in the research as challenging for policy development. I'm finishing with this ones. There's a problem with training data sets. I mean, there are a lot of problems with training data sets from the proprietary nature and character. Not all data sets are absolutely open for everyone to train and to use and to deploy and to feed into the systems that they are developing. And also the accuracy. After 1.5 years of the research, we have talked a lot about algorithmic bias and algorithmic transparency 1.5 years ago. And through different talks, through IGF and other fora, with particularly Professor John Kanatachi, the rapporteur for privacy, I've come to a, not totally convinced, but mostly convinced that the algorithms themselves pose less of a problem concerning transparency. There is the problem that they are dynamic, organic bodies of code, so as such, it's impossible to audit them. But then Professor Kanatachi says, if there is remedy, then for the purpose of rights, I think we have enough of a way out. So that's an interesting take for me. But apart from that, apart from transparency, it's important that we set the freedom for the training data sets, their proprietary nature, and the bias of data sets themselves. Not so much of algorithms, but what's the quality and what are the standards that we're going to give to these training data sets. And the last take is stemming from the artificial intelligence for inclusion. I think we should think of AI. I think we're before a technology that may, in a moment in history, that may mean a broader inclusion than we ever had through artificial intelligence techniques, or a broader concentration of power than we ever had to. So this is the reason why we have to decide, and this is the reason why we have to act swiftly and intelligently and in collaboration, because if we do not do anything concerning the development of these techniques, they are just going to catalyze economic, social, geopolitical trends and make the centers of power remain where they are and more concentrated than ever. Otherwise, if we look at ways to distribute power, economic value, if we take, for example, the recommendation of the World Economic Forum report of digital dividends, that we need to share the richness that the digital world is sharing, then we may be heading for a better future in terms of deployment and implementation of AI techniques. I thank you very much once again for your attention. I'm ready for questions if you have them.
Yes. Thank you, Claudio. Yeah. Next speaker is Professor Ma, who has been engaged in the field of AI, especially computer vision, for many years. It's your time now, please.
Hello, everyone. Actually, I would like to thank IGF and also the organizer of the workshop of having me. I'm not expert in policy makings, and also I'm more on the technological side. So probably today just provide you a little bit of perspective from a more or less more purely technological perspective. Maybe some of my experience may provide you some thoughts and about how maybe future policies for artificial intelligence would probably have impact or influence on our field. So I'm from the UC Berkeley. So this is a little bit of history about myself. I spent almost entire career doing research in artificial intelligence, especially in computer vision and data science. Looking back at my career, I spent almost an equal amount of time. Half of the time in US, since I graduated from Berkeley, and half of the time in China, and in particularly I was the manager of the computer vision groups in Microsoft Research in Asia, which very much incubated almost all the leaders of the current computer vision startups in China that you heard about, SenseTime and Face++, and so on. Recently I've returned to UC Berkeley as a professor EX, back to research. And first of all, I just like to give you a little bit of personal history about my encounter with some of the technology that you are familiar with today. Just next slide, please. Yeah. So my research I started when I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley, and we were actually really interested in how to perceive the 3D world. I mean, for computer vision, that was about 20 years ago. At the time, the computer vision was not even a field, right? So we really trying to understand how the machine be able to perceive, interact, and with the 3D world. This is a book we wrote back then, and which featured a few applications we'll show next. Next slide. Yeah. So this is actually a project down at Berkeley. Was actually a federal project, also jointly with California government. It's really about intelligent highway, and that's about 1990s, late 1990s. Actually, my master's thesis is precisely about how to use computer vision to do autonomous driving. And the project was very successful. Actually, our goal was in our car, actually riding about 80 miles per hour on the highway. Didn't get any incident. So, but it actually took a while, right? So at the time that the technology is there, and it's actually quite works amazingly. But you wonder why it never really, gain any traction in the industry, right? But nowadays, if you look at, after about nearly 20 years, suddenly that we see autonomous driving everywhere. There's literally hundreds of companies nowadays doing startups or even trying to get autonomous driving into the market, like Google and so on, many companies in China. So I'll mention a little bit of what the reason why it didn't really took off just in a second. It has something to do with policy. So this is after the car, we actually at Berkeley we started the autonomous helicopters. Started with a Navy project trying to have helicopter landing autonomous on a moving ship. So it's actually using, as you can see at the time that even computer vision technology very much can emulate the precision of the best GPS at the time in terms of positioning and orientations and so on. So next, please. So nowadays you see that after about 20 years, you see all this technology gets disseminated into the consumer market, and there's UAVs everywhere at the palm size, so one even landed on the lawn of the White House and so on. And so next slide. So the first question is, we had this technology 20 years ago. Why they were not, really, of course, many reasons, right? Maybe the price, maybe the, maturity or robustness of the technology. But I know one reason that actually very much slowed down after the California Path project, the government and really tried to disseminate the technology into the automobile industry, but really sees a lots of obstacles. One particular obstacle is that, from what I know, was that the United States has too many lawyers. So that so the insurance company is actually the obstacle behind trying to preventing having too many sensors or too many automations in a car for whatever reasons. Maybe some lawyers are afraid they may lose jobs. I mean, maybe that's a good thing. So Rich gives an example. First, my first encounter with, some societal regulations or policy actually can affect the dissemination of technology, which is a big lesson for me at the time. I was a student. So of course, later on we end into live into UAVs. So we also all the news these days, right? For example, airspace safety. Right? There was an incident back in China that some people flying UAVs around an airport, shut down the entire airport because it sort of endangered the civil aviations and so on. And also there was that UAV, some nuts fly a UAV over the fence of the White House and it caused some incident. And also there was the issue that because these days UAVs become very, very intelligent, right? Have cameras, they can watch things, they can analyze what's going on. I heard there was an incident, the US government is suing the DJI for violating certain privacies. So all these things, as you can see, although technology can make wonders, right? But somehow it's very complicated things to have those advanced technology to enter our lives because they affect so many, they change our lives. They affect many different aspects that as engineer, we probably do not anticipate ahead of time, right? Our job is to try to make the technology as cheap, as good, as the best possible. But so it's really a much bigger societal issue that to discuss the implications of those technologies in our lives. So from my experience, right, I've always very interested in watching and analyzing the differences in technological advancement. In particular, in the two markets I know very well, right, because I spend most of the time both in US and China. If you look at the two countries, in terms of number of companies, size of investment, market value, number of research papers and patents filed, it's kind of evident that US and China are very much the two leading countries that in the development of AI technologies. So here's a little bit distribution numbers that I borrow from the Professor Zhu Min. He's the dean of the business school of Tsinghua. 65, you can see that the first three countries very much has like 65 of all AI companies, and especially US and China. And also the patents filed in 2016 was also US and China very much, and also in Japan are not that far behind. So that's, so in terms of research in AI, of course, both the United States and China actually lead by a large margin, of course, we just saw. But there's a little bit difference. The US the university and companies focus more on the fundamental theory, technology, and systems, whereas AI research in China is mostly application-driven, product-driven, right? So shortly put, in terms of research, the United States excels in impact, whereas China wins in numbers, scale. Because it just has a very large population and also market. From a technological standpoint, the United States very much dominates in fundamental technologies such as chip design, manufacturing, and server operating systems, computing platforms, whereas China is very much focused on applications, right? Such as face recognition, speech recognition, and also due to its very large market. Again, in terms of technology, United States probably excels in depth, but China really wins in scale. In terms of talent in AI, it's kind of interesting story. If you look at the top 30 universities, top AI groups of the world, by whatever, academic standards. Nearly 3/4 are in the United States, but China has none right now. On the industrial side, the United States already has 5 companies that with over 5,000 employees on R&D in AI-related areas, but China has none. Of course, the AI teams in China, companies like Tencent or ByteDance and all this, are growing like crazy right now, very quickly, due to China's tremendous market demand. We actually would anticipate that, see, this is just a little bit of, numbers I got a couple of days ago, this sort of AI top 100, startups worldwide, I think. So you can see already there's quite a few of them. I mean, a very large portion of them actually Chinese companies. The rest of them are also U.S. as well. So next slides probably. Yeah. So as you can see that the one thing that the good thing about directly touch the market is that the incident I encountered is that these days we talk about policies, right? Very often we talk about policies that try to address people's concerns about AI, security, privacy, in danger, or it's going to have, we all know that technology is sort of double-edged sword. But there's a very interesting story, and I get to know that actually can we use also design policies that can really encourage AI or AI companies to do greater good for society? This example that we probably do not really anticipate. It's kind of an Amber Alert for, like in U.S. we have whenever a child missing or a missing person, we shows messages on cell phone or some of the billboards on highway. So this is actually the ByteDance side, because this really media company that control the source of creation media and also dissemination or consuming of the news and entertainment. So they have a very good, interesting app that whenever there's a missing person, you can work with the company, and then they will send, because they know the geolocation, the profile of the users. So they actually can very accurately push information about missing person to areas that help, or to the right group of people to help with locating the missing person. So just so far, they already pushed, for example, nearly 25,000 personal messages that can reach, every week, that can reach 20 million people. Imagine that, 20 million people can help you to find the missing person, and also covers 200 cities in China. So I think by any standard, I live in U.S. for many years. I mean, Amberstein is very, very successful, but it's really, in a way, it's really no comparison to this kind of efficiency and scale. And so far, it already helped identify over 4,000 confirmed cases, missing person cases, by just using this simple app alone, right? So this is something I think, hopefully, for the future policymakers to think about, right? Really how to use at the policy level to encourage companies to do greater good, right? So next, please. So, and of course, finally, I mean, in terms of investment, in terms of future, right? So, I mean, we are interested in investment. So far, again, U.S. and China is very much the largest investors in AI technology, far beyond the rest of the world, probably. Based on number from 2016, the venture capital investment in the United States obviously is larger than China, but you can see the investment in China is already comparable in scale compared to U.S., right? But again, we see the same kind of focus, right? U.S. sort of very strong in fundamentals, like processors, chips, machine learning theory, and also platforms. But China is very, very strong in even exceeded U.S. in terms of all the applications. Computer vision, auto driving, autonomous driving, speech recognition, so on and so forth, right? So this is probably gave, the reason I put all these numbers, and I'm not trying to make draw contrast, right? So but it really just to give the policymakers something to think about. You have to have policy works for sort of two extreme worlds, right? So here is very free market, but there's a lot of the application-driven fundamentals, West versus East, and also just not long ago, recently, China actually, government has made it a national strategy to strengthen its position in artificial intelligence and plan to pour tremendous government support in the next decade or so, or 2 decades. But on the other hand, on the U.S. side, is completely very much industry-driven. It's still very much free market type of models. So next, please. So this gives just a few things to think about, right? Really, whatever future policies for we live in a very complex world. I mean that the policy has to accommodate a difference of markets and even nations, right? U.S. and China are 2 examples, or more, you can even call them 2 end of the spectrum. Free market versus government-driven, applications versus fundamentals, how you can let them to work together so they have a win-win situation rather than competing or even boycotting each other, right? So also policies that resolve concerns with securities, safety, and privacy. I think that's, just like internet, I think has similar concerns. Also, personally, I would like to see policies that really encourage companies, AI technologies, to do good for the greater, to the society, right? Can we, be able to, rather than just a voluntary, things. So I hope that, the difference will not divide us, rather than allow us to collaborate and to complement each other. And also through a multinational and maybe multi-stakeholder discussion and collaborations, we will be able to reach an international baseline, right, that for the governance of artificial intelligence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ma, and thank you all the speakers sharing and thoughtful views about that may take further and careful thinking of AI development. Now, let's move to Q&A session. Anyone has questions, please raise your hand. Okay, you.
Hello.
Second.
My name is Jehan Deluca. I'm working for a standards developing organization. So I want to thank all of the panelists for these very interesting presentations. So I am mostly interested in the topic of standards. So listening to Mr. Deluca, I could understand that there was some work on the engineering level for standardizing AI, for instance with IEEE. Mr. Ma also talked about the importance of policies. But I think that there are different areas that are very important for AI, and correct me if I'm wrong because I'm no specialist. There is the technical aspect, there is the legal aspect, there are also business and economic issues. And I was wondering, according to you, what would be the best way to take into consideration all of these aspects into a coherent manner? Because sometimes people are very much specialized in one area, be it technical, legal, or business. But with AI, we need to take into account all of this at the same time. So how can we bring people with different specialties on the same table and ensure that all those aspects will be taken care of, especially on an international level? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerome. You couldn't pick an easier question to start with, could you? This problem of interdisciplinarity, by the way, is one of the challenges, Professor Gasser, one of the challenges that he mentions that I didn't during my presentation. It's already there, and pretty much any colloquium, any symposium on artificial intelligence gets to that point. The one in Rio, for example, was particularly interesting because it already gathered activists, journalists, data scientists, policymakers, computer scientists, and engineers. So I think that's a start from an international perspective. I would like to bring something from another, to import from another environment, and that might throw some light in what we're looking here. The problem of security through cryptography and access, lawful, legitimate access by authorities to information and content had been tackled for long in conferences of activists on one side, and then conferences in law enforcement on another side. So I have a double nationality. I'm a computer scientist and a lawyer. So I used to be with activists in one side, with lawmakers and law enforcement authorities in the other side. They hardly ever talked. And it was a pleasure to me in, I think, May last year. There was a huge gathering in The Hague at Europol where everyone was there. And I believe just criminals weren't there. They were the only group that were not represented. But activists were there, cryptographers were there, civil society was there. The judges in Belgium, for example, who are responsible for counterterrorism measures, they were talking together. There's no magic to the very important and difficult hurdle that you mentioned. There's no magic. There has to be dialogue. This dialogue is not easy because the jargons are different. The languages are different. The problems they face are different. So spaces like this one here, like IGF, are essential for that. But other more practical work, like the IEEE is developing, and like like the governments are also developing, may as well be a way forward. That there's no magic; it's dialogue. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, I'm afraid the sir, yeah. Okay, it's you, yeah.
Hello, good morning. This is Wali Bakari from Iralu Secretariat. My question is this, it's just about the underlying technology of AI, which is software engineering. And I understand that you know, the verification and the authentication of the software rely much heavily on the modeling and formalization process, okay? And now, do you think, my question to the panelists anyway, do you think these processes and methodologies be enshrined in policy framework to serve as guidelines and best practices? Would those help to extenuating the concerns and the challenges of AI? Thank you.
Question for all the speakers. Okay, Mr. Satish.
Thank you for the question. But before I get into that question, I'd like to also say that IEEE has produced a document called the Ethically Aligned Design, which is a work of a working group, and they are also, they've constituted an IEEE P7000 standards working group, which is working on standards for ethically aligned design. Coming to this question of how do we review, audit the software and the principles embedded in the software in AI, it is not an easy question again. The problem is that on the one hand, the rules are not really laid down as rules that we can see and touch and discuss. On the other hand, most of the algorithms are proprietary work of companies, and they are not out for we can't discuss about it in public in a forum like this because it is the property of intellectual property of a particular company. The third problem is the engine and the data. Professor touched on the training set issue. The engine and the data are different, and the data is actually refining the engine on a continuous basis. So there are these challenges that are there when we talk about auditing. And this whole human rights approach to the problem has been mentioned, that as long as we can have a regime that will look at the output of these engines, maybe that will safeguard the concern that you are raising. But to me, that does not make full sense as an open source activist. I would have liked that there has to be some formal review of these algorithms. And in a forum like IGF, a multi-stakeholder process for that. But given the fact that it's a proprietary property of companies, I don't think that's going to happen in the near future. Thank you.
I just want to add a little bit, about, I think there's things we could learn from the internet. So I think the public property has, there's the understanding of technology may really require some time for the public or people from other areas to getting about artificial intelligence. So one thing I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of misunderstanding, to be honest, what it capable of or not capable of. Even within our field, there's people do not necessarily understand very well. So just like internet, I hope the policy in the future will be as minimal as possible. I mean, how safeguard the most important principles, but not to add too many constraints. Otherwise, you can kill. We'll never see the kind of prosperity that internet has brought to us. The technology, precisely, we have very open, very tolerant policies, and of course, safeguarding all the values we cherish. But adding too many constraints in very early on, you actually can probably, either divide the industry, or the industry will refuse to cooperate in any way, or even the government will refuse to cooperate. So that's something I just wanted to, from a very technical standpoint, in order for the technology to evolve, it's still very at its, the HI technology, in my view, is still very much at its infancy, right? We see promises, but many of them still just promises, right? So that's we really wanted to encourage. This will benefit the world. I'm pretty confident that as long as we are using it in the right way. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm afraid. Yeah, Miss. Yeah.
Just a comment. I am part of the IEEE Global Initiative for AI Ethics, and I also chair the Outreach Committee, as well as the standards, so I can maybe pour in some light on some of the questions that happen here. The question of multidisciplinarity is a big one. I think that we are doing some significant work on it. The P7000 series incorporates experts from many fields. We're talking about ethical design, we're talking about safety, we're talking about bias as well, and it's open and free for everyone to join. We are actively looking for members to help us shape these standards. And I think that in regards to the ethically aligned design output, when it comes to really leveling out the play field and setting up fair rules of the game, there's a lot of work to be done. That is for sure, but I think that we are at a point where we have many members, including members representing companies, that are actively approaching us and asking us to provide them with help because they are not sure how to do it. So then again, this is also free and completely open for everyone to join. If this is something that you're interested in and you think that you can have an impact or have an idea, then please feel free to reach out to me. And I would really love to incorporate you into the initiative so that we can do a better job.
May I add?
Okay.
If I may add, thank you very much. It was very interesting for you and essential that you mentioned that initiative and that invitation. And I would like to build on a comment from Professor Ma that it's good to have someone from the technical aspect of the development of technology saying that it is in its early stages. It's very important because the hype is very high for this past 2 years. So we have come to a point where we believe we can pretty much do anything, and we will do a lot. A lot will happen through these techniques and through these methods, but we can't do everything. And we listen to Professor Ma, we listen to Jeffrey Hinton, we listen to Jehan Deluca, and they repeat the same thing, it seems, and it's something that the industry might not like to hear at this moment, that the technology is available much more than what it actually is mature for. And I would leave you with an example of what happened to Mr. Eric Loomis from Wisconsin, whose possibility of committing a new crime during a trial was analyzed by an algorithm called proprietary algorithm called COMPASS, Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. The algorithm itself, through the inputs that it was given, placed him in a high rate of possibility of recidivism, and the penalty was set on the basis of that output. Mr. Loomis challenged the rules through which the algorithm set those rules. He was denied access to the way the algorithm decided. It was challenged until the Supreme Court of the United States, which answered in July, in summer, that the output was enough. It was not necessary to look into the way it processes. This doesn't seem to be a right solution.
Comment. Yeah, I got to those gentlemen ladies. Like, I think before going to start the the Claudio said before going to the hard role, we better start having more mature discussion and have some moral model like robot 3 principle the AI at least keep the human dignity, and that's the start point at scratch, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, gentlemen. Yeah.
Yes, Martin Schmalzried from Families Europe, which is a European NGO. I just wanted to touch upon a point that Mr. Satish made about employment and the problem of unemployment. I mean, it seems that AI now is advancing very fast because of the way that the system is geared now with competition and each country trying to get an edge. But at the same time, it seems as if they're sawing the branch on which they're sitting, which is, you know, if productivity sort of decouples with workers' wages, which is what is happening right now, I mean, you won't have anyone to sell that stuff that you're producing in mass productions to. And so in a sense, you're basically undercutting or undermining the economic system as AI advances. And so it's kind of like a dead end, like a real dead end. So I was wondering if in the AI field you're considering policies that are much more general, that seem completely unrelated to AI, but that are a precondition for it to actually have a future in this world. Otherwise, if the economy collapses, obviously everything collapses. So I was thinking specifically, for instance, about universal basic income, how that could help AI, and more specifically, universal basic income, not necessarily as a transfer payment, but something much more radical or innovative and disruptive, just like AI, for instance, a self-generated cryptocurrency. And there have been attempts at doing this, that are emerging right now, and that are not dependent on controlling the state or having all these policy discussions, but just simply the people taking it up and say, we're going to start using this because, it's the only way.
I suppose the question was directed to one of the information that Professor Satish brought, but I think it's a concern that is shared by anyone who looks a little bit deeper, a little bit to the day after tomorrow in AI. We have already, in this, it has been exactly 1 year now that we have had a large conference in Brazil, in the labor courts, about the future of work, and it's a very clear view. Anyone who looks mid to long term to AI development has to talk seriously about some kind of basic income system. So it's in the view of any of us. If it's such disruptive as a self-generated cryptocurrency, I assure you it's not, at least not yet. It's the first time I hear what can be the seed of a very nice idea. But definitely, you don't talk, as Jehan has said, it's an interdisciplinary thing. So if we talk about deployment, implementation, first economic gains, but then in the long run, what happens, right? So the basic income alternative is in the view of anyone who talks seriously, mid or long term, about AI. The alternatives are not set yet. That one might be food for thought.
Okay, Mr. Satish, any additional words?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think this is a matter of great concern, particularly to the developing world, where the employment is a very, of course, employment is a universal concern, not just for the developing world. But some of us believe that this may impact developing countries asymmetrically. Now, developing countries so far have not thought about the universal basic income. This has been more a concern of the developed world. So we are very much delayed, and I think the developing countries of the world have to sit up and take notice of what is going to happen. May not be in the immediate term, but definitely in the medium term. This is a real issue that you have raised. Thank you very much.
Any other words? Akili?
We can have more questions.
Okay. Mr. Ma? Another question? Okay, Miss.
Hi there, my name is Katie Watson. I'm from the US and I work in the public interest. And I'm interested in how you all think that copyright and intellectual property law will need to change to simultaneously help this new technology to grow and to protect consumers. Like Mr. Lucena, you were talking about the example of someone who was convicted of a crime not being able to understand why he was convicted, while at the same time protecting innovators so that they are incentivized to keep creating this technology.
Want to weigh in?
Yeah, well, I think IP is always an important issue. So what needs to change in order to foster, the growth of AI? So one particular area I would think about, there's a lot of, currently that the AI, at least the current generation of AI very much relies on what we call the supervised learning, that relies on, be able to consume a lot of training data in particular area, for example. But then it actually causes questions, problems. For example, one of the very promising area we foresee that AI may help tremendously is the medical medicine and so on, right? But then that's also an area where data is very sensitive, right? So how do you, we even from a technological point of view, many of my colleagues believe that many of our tools, AI tools, techniques, can really help to improve the diagnosis or prognosis of, based on medical data or input. Given that we have seen all the histories or many of the cases, how they've been processed, how doctors practice. But there has been, of course, the barriers between, that's really talking about different industry, right? That would the medical industry would allow the technological companies to, such as Google. Actually, I think there has been a discussion between Google and the Harvard Medical School try to collaborate. So I think it wasn't dead, but still, there's a lot of obstacles, barriers. One of the previous questions is that how they're going to use the data. And that raises question as again, who owns the data, and also as well as the potential violation of the privacy and so on and so forth. So those are actually precisely the issues I think needs to be discussed in the future in order for AI to disseminate into broader fields, financial or medicine or even other areas and so on. So that's a very good question. I'm not an expert on that, but certainly we are aware of that. That's going to be a very major. If we don't resolve that, we will, AI won't go that far. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Time is running out. We may only have one question. Who will ask? Okay, Miss. Miss? Okay.
Hello, I have a quick question because we mentioned the policy challenge of AI. We have different stakeholders, someone from government and someone from industry and also academy. So right now it's still at the very early age that AI development. But we see lots of initiatives such as IEEE, ITU, and also some government released some reports and like Berkman Center you mentioned, and universities, they're all doing all kinds of researches. So what will be the good model in your mind that in the future, good model of governance, or how does the stakeholders cooperate in the governance of AI in the future? My question is for the Claudia, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Again, a $1 million question. You mean the environment where they should cooperate? This,
The model. What is the model how we foster this multi-stakeholders?
I think the spaces we have to discuss these issues are enough for the time being. I'm particularly worried with the IP issue that was raised here and that Professor Ma has just raised. Compass shows clearly to me, but absolutely clearly, that some delicate public uses of data processing through artificial intelligence cannot be proprietary. Now, this is something that we've been holding. We don't have a lot of support from the industry on that side, evidently. But there are, in the academia and in the research environment, there's been a growing voice that we're not advocating for the abolishment of all barriers and all intellectual property protection. But this case specifically shows us that some very delicate, very sensitive uses of public information that affects people's rights such intensely as a restriction of liberty cannot go unanswered through the obstacle or behind the obstacle of intellectual property. That is something that it's absolutely clear for us. How do we build that? In which model do we implement that? It's still very difficult to state. In the FDA for Algorithms paper from Andrew Tutt, I think it's the name of the lawyer from the US government, he proposes an interesting structure that is available in other fields of regulation, that if you have to audit something like that, and this is might be an interesting balancing model to the question our fellow here posed before, that we could try to set a structure where to protect the intellectual property, we just don't open everything about source, code, and data, but we constitute a panel of people, an accredited panel of people who will audit with a certain level of reserve the information that is under auditing for public interest, and then we have to trust the position of that paper, whether ethical, moral considerations and legal and regulatory considerations are in place. So, again, your question is very good for a reason. It doesn't have a proper answer right now. But I think the spaces we have to cooperate and start discussing are enough for now. I would like to see more international cooperation because the national initiatives that are raising in the countries I talked about might not address the problem from the broad perspective of borderless world which we have. So I would like to see more cooperation in that sense, but the models are not stated yet. If anything else, but for the reason that Professor Ma stated, the technology for everyday applications is still in its very early stages. So I think we'll have a lot to see in the deployment, in the implementation, and also in the environment for discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm afraid I have to say we should stop here. And many good ideas and viewpoints contributed by the speakers and audience need us to further develop and think over. Their wisdom and insights will benefit the sound development of AI industry. If you have more interest to this topic, I think we could exchange and discuss later after the workshop. Once again, thank you very much for all of you to join this workshop. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Hi, nice to meet you. Oh, no, I happen to know him, and a lot of Brazilian fellows also happen to work in the Berkman Klein Center, but I haven't been there yet. Yes, because he texts informal texting he wrote is a very important reference for me. I met him here. He's around.
Actually, this is my old
Sure.
car.
I'm afraid my cards went out in 3 hours of IGF. But if you can pass me your contact or get mine.
Can you leave your
Sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
your email? I have your email.
Yeah.
Your phone number. Yeah.
I'm awfully sorry. The cards weren't enough for the beginning of the.
I know. Yeah.
I actually don't have a car because my car I'm going in January, so this is my old car. Yeah, I'm currently going to UC Berkeley.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you can just find me online. This is my only car.
Okay, but will you do have something with but much more from the perspective, I'm also an engineer and an economist, and facing, I want to face the questions about AI and ethics also.
Welcome to Bay Area. That's where all
So I will follow up with that, okay?
Sure, sure.
Because I much more like your idea about what Google is going to do.
Well, in Italy, I'm absolutely sure that you have one of the centers is one of the founding centers of the network,
That's very
the Nexus Center for Internet and Society in Torino.
very high.
And among the best. Yes, but if you leave me a contact, I'm sorry. Claudio Lucena at gmail.com. Claudio, yeah, in one word, Claudio Lucena at gmail.com.